Crime Book Club. Thank you for joining us this lovely Friday evening from wherever you are in the world. And hello, welcome back, Julie Anderson.
Hello, thank you for having me. Hello, UK Crime Book Club.
Very excited to have you. So you are here to talk about The Midnight Man.
I am.
Do you want to show the cover and tell us a little bit? I love that cover.
Well, the cover is quite dramatic, isn't it? I mean, it's
really?
very 1930s, 1940s sort of noir, which is what I and the designer wanted. So, yeah, that's
tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, well, as you can gather from what I've just said, it's set in 1940s, 1946 actually, immediately post World War II, and it's. I wanted to write about that because I mean I know this probably sounds a bit daft, but I wanted to write about contemporary things post pandemic, but I didn't want to write about COVID. So I looked for a period which would be analogous, and the obvious time to write about was immediately post World War II, because like then you know the whole world had undergone this huge global trauma. Lots of people had died, many people had been injured, and when it finished there was a sort of euphoria, but that didn't last too long, and afterwards there was austerity and hard times, and that resonated with me as how it is now, really. So I thought, well, this is a good period to set the book in, and then I thought too about how sort of almost behind the scenes a new society was being built. So the welfare state, the NHS, lots of welfare support, education, essentially dealing with those sort of societal ills that made life so difficult for individuals, but saying, no, we, the state, are going to take responsibility with local authorities for trying to sort some of this out. And that was all going on at the same time. So I wanted to capture that as well, because I mean, a lot of that has been dismantled. But I also, I suppose, wanted to say, you don't know what you got till it's gone.
Yeah.
And that remarkable things can be done even in times of austerity. So that's why I decided to set it then. But also, I wanted to write a book about women's experience, especially at that time. So The Midnight Man really started to form in my mind about two women who very different, but who wouldn't accept the life that was being handed to them and decided to go their own way. And part of that was not being persuaded to stop investigating when they thought that there was justice to be served. So that's really sort of what The Midnight Man is about.
And Ellie and Faye, they are really very, very different in their histories and kind of the things that they desire, but at the same time, they both have this desire to do something more than is expected of them.
Yes.
Which I loved.
Yeah, they're very, very different. I mean, Faye is a good South London working class girl, big working class family, living in Clapham, left school at 14, didn't get any qualifications, but has worked her way up at the hospital where she works to be the manager of the canteen, and also to help out with accounts and the office and so on. So, I mean, this is a bright woman who wouldn't have had, despite not having very much education, has sort of forged a role for herself. Though, as she herself says, if the war hadn't come along, she'd probably have married and just gone no further than the front door, and been a housewife and mother, which was what was expected of women at that time, not just for working class women either. I mean, Eleanor, who's the other participant in this duo, is the daughter of the Dean of Worcester Cathedral. So she comes from a very different background, much more privileged, much more educated, But still, she's expected to marry, have kids, settle down. And for both these women, the war has changed their lives completely. And they can't go back to how it was before. It's quite interesting. I had Hobeck Books, who published The Midnight Man,
and are watching at the moment.
Hello. Have a sort of team of readers who read early copies of the novel, and they sent me the comments from one lady that ran something like this: "Tell Julie she's got it right. My mother used to tell me all these stories about wartime, and I had an auntie who worked in a munitions factory, and for the first time in her life, she had her own money. And women were independent, and men didn't like it." And I thought, well, great, actually. I have got it right. That is how it is. And neither Ellie nor Faye want to go back to that sort of life that's been planned out for them. They've had, in a sense, although it's been very tragic, and Faye's fiance has died, and Ellie has all sorts of personal problems. They've had a good war. My first mother-in-law, ex-mother-in-law, was a lovely lady who did go back to Hearth and Home, but she used to regale the family with stories about her wartime escapades, and it was clear she had a whale of a time. There was lots of tragedy, and it wasn't easy, but she really embraced the freedoms that she would never have got in peacetime. So you have, at 1946, you have this sort of crucial moment where a whole generation of women has been doing things, and actually doing them quite well, running things at home while there are no men at home. And now the men are coming home, and they've all got to go back to what they were doing before. They've got to, go back and be a housewife, or do pin money jobs or whatever. They can't carry on. And as you know, I mean, Eleanor is a legal clerk, and she can't get work because nobody will offer her a place, because there are lots of men coming home from the war. So she has to do something else. But it seemed to me that there was a whole generation of women, like my former mother-in-law, who had to go back to Hearth and Home, and whose ambitions and hopes and aspirations were destroyed because they'd had a taste of what they could do. And it was obvious that they could do so much more than there was being asked of them. But they had to go back to how it was before. And my two ladies refused to do that.
Which is fantastic. It's one of the things that I loved the most about the book, because you just watch them have this glimpse of what could be, and they're going to fight tooth and nail for it. Yeah, they are not going to go back to what was handed to them and what was expected of them once they see what's actually possible. Why would they? Well, unless that was what they really wanted.
Yeah. No, well, I think that's right. But it's also quite difficult, I think, today for women, young women especially, to actually understand how difficult it was then. I mean, women couldn't open a bank account without the sponsorship of a man. You could work in the civil service, for example, but as soon as you got married, there was the marriage bar, so you had to stop work. When you think about it now, it's bizarre, and it's also quite interesting. It makes me think of Margaret Atwood and Gilead in The Handmaid's Tale, when she details how modern society sort of regressed into Gilead. One of the first things that happen is that women's bank accounts are shut down, which means they have no access to funds, which means they have got to go through a man in order to get what they want. And this is sort of how it was. You couldn't open a bank account without a male sponsor, which is unbelievable now when you think about it. And some younger readers sort of are a bit, I think, shocked by that.
I think one of the things that always gets me, no matter how many times I hear it, is how long the rationing continued after the war.
That
always surprises me.
Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, in 1946, rationing was actually worse than it was during war years. So bread had never been rationed during the war, but it
Mm.
was after the war, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
But it was. I mean, and I mean, Britain was bankrupt, completely bankrupt. It had spent all its money on the war effort, and I mean, that's largely why, essentially, we then subsequently withdrew from Empire, because we couldn't afford to keep one. But it is a very austere time. And whilst people did rejoice hugely that the war was over, you know, in many ways, the problems hadn't gone away. They were still going to be there, and did worsen in some respects. I mean, things like fuel was very difficult to come by. And as you know, because you've read the book, I mean, 1946-7 was then the worst winter on record. When you see, you know, whenever we have a bad winter and you watch the news and they show the black and white photos of, you know, the steam locomotive going through those huge snow drifts and men trying to dig it out and stuff, that's 1946-7. Because it was a dreadful winter, and added to that, fuel was in short supply and rationed. So people were cold, you know, and they didn't have enough to eat. It must have been very grim indeed.
It must have been. Yeah, absolutely. We do have some other hellos so that I don't forget. Rebecca from Hobeck is saying her mum remembers that winter.
Ah, yes.
Leslie's saying, thank goodness so much has changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Malcolm Hollindrake, hi Malcolm, was fascinated by the cover of the book. How did you decide on that design and format, Gina? He says.
All right. Hi, Malcolm. It was largely because I did a sort of storyboard, a sort of mood board for Jane Mapp, who's the designer of the cover, often used by Hobeck Books, and I wanted it to be 1940s film noir based. So I did a sort of mood board of 1940s movie posters. In fact, movies that came out in 1946. So it was very, very relevant to that year. And actually, it's an enormously wonderful roster of film noir posters. So you've got The Postman Always Rings Twice. You've got Notorious, the Hitchcock. You've got The Big Sleep, Bacall and Bogart. You've got The Blue Dahlia, the Alan Ladd, Veronica Lake. There's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful British film came out in 1946 called Green for Danger, which it was written by Sidney. It's Gilliatt and his partner, and I can't remember what the partner's name is, but it was based on a Christiana Brand novel set in a hospital, and in a way, it's a bit of an inspiration for the book, really, because it's this sort of small, perfectly formed whodunit set in a hospital in wartime. Not post-war, in wartime, but that film with Alistair Sim as the wonderfully lugubrious Inspector Cockerell came out in 1946. So there's a whole raft. Oh, The Third Man, Orson Welles.
Oh, okay.
Well, you know, I mean, amazingly famous film noir films came out that year, and they all had these wonderful posters, and they all had. I mean, they have the sort of dark background, the slanted lettering. You know, very, very dramatic, and Jane sort of came up with. Sorry, I'm veering off to the right there. Jane came up with a variety of suggestions, and Rebecca and Adrian and I sort of asked questions and said, "Well, can you put that with that?" And that's how we arrived at it.
I love that. I love that you had so much input, because I mean, some authors wouldn't be too fussed about the cover. But the fact that you wanted to be involved and you could be, it just shows what a great team Hobeck are.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I also did. I mean, I did a sort of weekly social media post with the latest film noir poster, which is how I know how many films were produced in 1946 that were because I found the posters out, and some of them were startlingly good. Some of them were distinctly average, some of the films that came out in 1946. There was one called what was it? Postal Inspector, and it was about the fraud of the American Postal Service, and it had a sort of Edward G. Robinson lookalike on the poster, with someone putting a letter in a letterbox. And you sort of thought, somehow you don't get that sort of film noir feel from this in the same way. There's no sort of smoking cigarette and sultry female. No, it's the Postal Inspector. They didn't get that one quite right, but some of them were extremely risque, and I didn't dare post them on social media. But I was quite surprised at that, because it was 1946.
Yeah, maybe wouldn't have expected that. One of the things we were talking about before we went live is the fact that the hospital really existed, and B, that there are still some buildings and some of the landmarks just kind of dotted around Clapham, and they kind of fit in with the natural habitat now.
Yeah,
which is it's the strangest thing to hear what this beautiful old hospital is now being used as.
Yes, I mean, if I tell you a bit about the hospital, I mean, it was
please.
The South London was founded by two pioneering women surgeons, Maud Chadbourne and Eleanor Davis Colley, who essentially qualified as surgeons at a time when there weren't any women surgeons, or at least not very many of them. And they were both suffragists, and were increasingly frustrated that there simply weren't enough services provided for women by women, because women wanted to be treated by women. But, doctors and surgeons, by and large, well, indeed, almost wholly, were men. And so they decided that they would try and set up their own hospital. And they founded the South London Hospital for Women and Children. They started raising money in 1912, and they purchased the buildings.
Which is astonishing.
Sorry?
It's astonishing how they got started.
Yeah, I know. They raised money from friends, influential people who they could tap for cash, basically, and public subscription, and in fact that they had a budget of £51,000, which in 1912 was an enormous amount. But they were very fortunate in that they got that at the last minute, because there was an anonymous donation from a member of the royal family. And it was widely believed that it was the Queen at the time who'd actually given them something like £20,000, which is, massive. But that enabled them to buy these two buildings on Clapham Common South Side. And the services started to be provided in 2013, though the building and the hospital was formally opened in 1913. I'm switching my centuries here, and the building was formally opened in 1916, and it was a hospital for women and children, women, girls, and boys up to the age of 7. No male patients over that age, and all staffed by women. So what was remarkable, I was reading things like minutes of the hospital management board and in the archives, and all the names were female, from the highest and most senior surgeon down to the porter. The porters who moved stuff around, they were all women. There were a couple of men involved. There was the hospital engineer was a man, and the hospital accountant was a man. And there were men on the board of governors. There were a couple of bishops and a brigadier on the board of governors. But aside from that, they were all female, which it must have been remarkable. And this was the start of the 20th century. Over a century ago, and you have this place in Clapham where there's this hospital, and the hospital carried on. It did take male casualties during World War One.
That's what I was going to ask you, whether that was true, that part that was in the book, was that accurate?
Yes, it was. Okay. They were allowed to take male casualties in World War One, but there had to be an Act of Parliament to allow them to do that, because the deeds of the trust were drawn so tightly that they could not, they were not allowed to take male patients, and they wanted to, to treat casualties. And they relied on that again during World War II. So men were admitted as patients, and also men were admitted as staff, wounded men who came back from the fronts, who could help. Also medics. For example, in the book you'll have read, there is a French doctor who serves there. Well, the Free French battalions were actually billeted in Clapham at the start of the war. So any French medical people would have, if they'd wanted to help out, they'd have helped out in the hospital, just as the character does in the book. And this hospital kept going as a woman-only institution until 1985, 84-5, and it was closed because Wandsworth Health Authority said that it was uneconomic. Now, this was a time when a lot of smaller hospitals were being closed, but I can tell you, having spoken to a lot of people who work there, that blood pressure still rises today when they hear that, because they say that's nonsense. Essentially, the powers that be wanted to close the hospital from day one. You know, it was never accepted by the establishment because it was women only, and it remained women only until the end. And there was a huge campaign to keep it open, with thousands of signatures collected in a petition taken to Downing Street, and from all over Britain and all over the Commonwealth. So a lot of women from Greenham came to take part in the protests. There was an occupation of the hospital, and nurses continued to offer health services from the hospital buildings, even though it was technically closed. And a lot of women came from the Commonwealth, because the old SLH had a school of midwifery that took a lot of students from Commonwealth countries, indeed what would have been countries of empire when it started. So India and Africa and the Indian subcontinent. And when the hospital was in danger of being closed, a lot of them came back to help out their alma mater. So there was this huge pressure to keep it open, but in the end it closed. They wanted to close it, and eventually the buildings were actually sold off to a developer. They were listed buildings, so they couldn't be knocked down, at least not the 1930s ones. And it is now an apartment block, another apartment block in London, and above a Tesco supermarket, where, as it happens, I do my shopping. So that's sort of still there, and it's still opposite Clapham South Tube Station, above which is Westbury Court, which is where some of the characters live. And just down the road from there is what was the Odeon Balham Hill, where they go to watch, to go to the cinema, which is now a majestic wine warehouse. So you've got a lot of the buildings that are still there. I mean, a lot of London has changed and Clapham has changed, but a lot of it has remained the same. So Clapham is still, ribbons of streets lined by Victorian pattern-built terraces, like the one that Faye and her family live in. They couldn't afford to live in it now because, the way that property prices. But a lot of it is still there. So you can, when I walk up to go to Tesco's on a Monday morning or whatever, it is quite strange because you're walking along Clapham South side and you've got the Common to your right, and you can see the tube station, Clapham South, up ahead. Above there is Westbury Court, and off to the left are the old hospital buildings. So it's and of course you've got the entrance to the deep shelters. That's still there on the Common as well. So all that sort of architecture, and I mean in the broadest sense, the architecture of the book is still available to be seen.
Which is such a wonderful thing. I know I'd love to go and see some of it. There are tours of some things as well. You wrote at the end of the book.
That's right. The London Transport Museum, which is supposedly carrying the book in its shop, does tours of the deep shelters. You have to be fairly fit to go on them because the lifts don't work anymore, and it's 180 steps down and, more importantly, back up. because these were very, very deep shelters. They were beneath the London Underground lines, so they were very deep. But London Transport Museum does what they call hidden London tours, and one of them that they do is the deep shelters at Clapham South, and the shelters are still there. So you've still got the bunks, you've still got, you know, the old signs that were there, and you can go down that. The numbers are quite small, so if people do want to go on them, you do have to book up well in advance, because they will only take a small number of people down. And indeed, there are as many people sort of being shepherds as there are on the tour, because there are miles of tunnels down there, and they can't afford for anybody to
no, of course not. Have you done the tour?
No, I haven't. I've been to the top of the shelters, but I've not actually done the tour. I relied on two friends who did do it and took lots of photographs, and also an article by Alison Wilson of the Clapham Society, because she did it and she wrote all about it as well. It's something that I had planned to do with a lady called Juliette Boyd, who was a surgeon anaesthetist at the SLH, and who has been a tremendous source of material for me, in that she was a sort of unofficial archivist of the hospital. And I discovered her, and I went round. I contacted her and went round to see her at her home in Wimbledon, and she'd just gone up into her loft, or rather sent her son up into her loft, and come down with boxes full of leaflets and photographs and letters about the early hospital, because she'd been collecting it all the time that she was working there. So this was like a sort of treasure trove, and Juliette and I were due to go on one of these tours, indeed the one that my friends went on, and we had to call it off because she was unwell. She had a stroke and couldn't do it, and so I didn't feel like I could go without her. Though we are going to do it at some point, but yeah, I mean the deep shelters themselves have a story of their own, which I will tell if people are interested. Essentially, the story starts in Civil War Spain, oddly enough, with English volunteers to the International Brigade, who, when the Civil War ended, came back to Britain and to London, having experienced for the first time what we would all experience during the Second World War, which was the sort of carpet bombing by Luftwaffe or the Italian Air Force of cities like Barcelona and Madrid, and most notably Guernica, of course, which was, you know, bombed into non-existence. So when they came back in 1939, and, you know, already people were beginning to realise that Britain would be at war fairly shortly. One of the things that they tried to get the government to do was to build deep shelters for the population to go into when the bombing started. And of course, the government didn't listen. And when the Blitz happened in 39-40, people were sheltering in the underground shelters. Everyone has heard about that. But of course, that's not what they were built for, and many of them weren't deep enough. So there was an appalling accident at Bank Station, which was a direct hit from a bomb, and something like 86 people died, and hundreds were injured. At which point, the government decided, well, maybe we should have listened to these people, and they started building these deep shelters. And there are 5 in North London and 5 in South London. Clapham has 3 of them. They were beneath the Northern Line. The engineers and structural workers went down into the Northern Line and then went down beneath to create these. And they weren't actually in service for the Blitz, but they did come into their own in 1944 when there were the V2 rocket raids over London. And literally nightly, you know, half the population of Clapham would gather up its things and go down into the shelters.
Wow.
So you know, that they have a resonance, historical resonance of their own, which is interesting.
It really is. And Steph Perrin, hi Steph. She's loved your other books, and she's really looking forward to reading this one.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. Thank you.
Which is always nice. So, do you want to give everybody a little kind of anyone who hasn't read your other books? Do you want to tell them something about those as well?
Well, I started. I guess I started writing crime by writing a trilogy of books that I have subsequently been called the Whitehall books, because they're all set in Whitehall, and you know, because
I love these books. I love Cassie.
Cassie Fortune is the heroine, who's a civil servant who gets drawn into very non-civil servanty type things, the first book is called Plague. It's got nothing to do with COVID. The plague in question is the plague of power, and what people will do to get it, and its different manifestations and so on. And that too is set underground. My husband keeps telling me I keep setting books underground, and I hadn't ought to. So book 2 of the Clapham trilogy is not going to be set underground, but Plague is also set underground in part. It has its underground, hidden underground ways, as indeed does opera in a very small way, which is it's like beneath the Houses of Parliament. But the 3 books are Plague, Oracle, which is set in Greece in Delphi, and Opera, which is back in London in Whitehall. And to my eternal astonishment, Opera was longlisted for the CWA Ian Fleming Steel Dagger for 2023, which was quite an experience. I couldn't quite believe it when it happened. I learnt about it by seeing Mike Craven's social media feed. Just one of his books was listed as well, and he tweeted the sort of little graphic from the CWA with the covers of the books on, and I was thinking, oh yeah, that's sort of, oh bloody hell, that's opera. And then proceeded to tell everybody I knew that opera was longlisted for CWA and Fleming Steel Dagger.
I'd have it printed on a T-shirt.
Yeah, almost. I should have done, shouldn't I? But that was sort of Saturday night, and my husband opened something to drink, and we celebrated and whatnot. And I went to bed and got a sore head, and woke up the following morning convinced that it was a mistake, and that actually someone had put the wrong book cover up on the graphic, and that I told all these people, and it wasn't real.
Yeah, I believe we call that Bayfair.
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely. But so I sort of got out of bed and walked my way somewhat woozily to the PC and set up the system and looked, and there it was still. So it wasn't an accident. I am the one thing actually I'm really proud of is that it was the only independently published book on the list. All the others were Big Five or imprints of the Big Five publishing houses. This was the only independently published book. So I think that was a very
double celebration.
Yeah.
Malcolm has asked, is that whistle jacket over your shoulder?
Yes, it is.
Can always rely on Malcolm to spot things.
Yeah, but somebody always, I mean, I'm going to have to get a different camera or something, because somebody always said, what's that horse over your shoulder? At least you spotted it was whistle jacket. Yes, it's yours, Stubbs.
So I like the fact that we'll go back to what we're actually talking about now. I like the fact that you did mirror then and now, and I think it's in more ways than so many changes happened after the war and so many changes have happened after the pandemic. I think it's really nice to see how the people within it change as well. And the mirroring of that, because there is still a long way to go with equality for lots of, groups in society. And to see that progress being made and to see how far we've come in some ways, but maybe not as far as we'd like in others. I think that was a really interesting parallel when I was reading.
Yeah. It's actually quite interesting, because I sort of lighted upon that period as reflecting with today and having contemporary relevance. But the more I read into it and the more that I saw, the more there were more parallels than I even imagined at the beginning. So, I mean, the austerity, the fact that, as you know, one of the characters in the book has tuberculosis, because, of course, this is just pre NHS. The NHS bill was read into law on November the 6th, I think, 1946.
And this is Phoebe, isn't it?
That's Phoebe, that's right.
Yeah, it's Faye's sister.
Faye's sister. And she has tuberculosis, which is a contagious disease, and until the development of specific antibiotics was a killer. And it reached pandemic proportions at various times in its history, and killed, you know, hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, rather like COVID. And Phoebe's admitted to hospital, and the parallels with COVID then become really very, very strong, because you know, people are permitted to go and see her, but they can't get close to her because she's contagious. She can't go home. She has to be isolated. Very, very similar sort of regime as, I mean, there's different disease, but a very similar sort of regime to that operated in hospitals during the pandemic more recently. But also, well, I mean, again, there was if you like, science came to the rescue in that there was a development of an antibiotic called streptomycin, which was actually trialled in London in 1946. It was a medical trial run out of the Brompton Hospital, although it had already been trialled in the States and found to be extremely effective. But it was a different population, so they had to try it over here. And the trial was run out of the Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, and I don't know whether the SLH took part in it, but in the book I have the hospital take part in it.
But you do acknowledge at the end that you really don't know whether, you know, the hospital took part. You do point that out at the end, that this was a kind of just a thing that you went with because obviously it fits with the story.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's as likely to have taken place in the SLH as it is in many other hospitals. I mean, they were looking for specific types of patient rather than, you know, dependent. It wasn't dependent on the institution. It was more to do with the types of patient that would be suitable for the trial. But I mean, so streptomycin came along, and you know, suddenly TB was not the killer disease that it had been. And just as in the pandemic, you know, we had the vaccines that came along and changed the way that people thought they might have to live. So there were lots and lots of parallels, and I kept falling over them. You know, things that were completely unlooked for, but they were there.
I'm sure if you wrote about another time period, you'd probably have similar parallels.
Yeah.
You know, another, you know, world events. There's bound to be.
Yeah, I think so. It just seemed, for me, in this little bit of South London, you know, that period was absolutely right. Partly because the buildings are still here, partly because, you know, these things by and large actually took place. So, and it would have been more apparent in somewhere like South London than maybe elsewhere in the UK. So it sort of asked to be written about, really.
Speaking of asking to be written about, you did mention a bit about book 2. So do you have a publication date? Do you know how far in are you with the writing? Have you completed the first draft? Where are you up to?
I've written it, essentially. It isn't ready yet, but I have written it, and I've sort of self-edited it. It will need editing, and I'll probably have to do it again anyway. And it is set in the same place with roughly the same characters, but in 1948, so 2 years after the events that take place in The Midnight Man. We're still struggling to find a title for it. I wanted to call it Brave New World, but unfortunately that's already been taken by someone with whom a comparison with whom it would only result in me looking very poor indeed. So I'm not going.
No, I don't think so.
But and then the third book, I'm beginning to sort of sketch out in my mind. It takes place in 1951. And it's called Festival because, of course, it's the Festival of Britain. But there are other festivals that happen in the book. So yeah, there is the trilogy is well underway, not just with the publication of the first book, but the second one is written and needs revising, and the third one I'm beginning to have all sorts of ideas about. So yeah, and I am told, having spoken with Rebecca earlier this week from Hobart Books, that we are looking to publish the book 2 in spring of next year, spring 25, and book 3 in spring 26.
Excellent. I did see a rather lovely photo of you both.
Sorry?
I did see a rather lovely photo of you and Rebecca.
Yes. We met Tottenham Court Road and walked up and found a pub with a roof terrace and sat outside, which was fun, until we were invaded by suits who sort of surrounded us, became very loud, and there was people coming out after work having a drink. But nonetheless, we still managed to hold our own.
I'm glad to hear it. So we talked a little bit about the options for women changing during the war. So we're looking at kind of, it made me wonder whether marriage figures changed. I mean, obviously, I know you said you weren't sure about the phrase baby boom, but you did put it into the book. You weren't sure about the first time it was really used. Yeah. But I think it still needed to be used as an expression that everybody's going to understand 2 words and everybody knows what happened. It's just one of those ubiquitous terms that people just understand.
Well, yeah, and this it was the baby boom. I mean, the men came home after the war, and a year later or whatever, all of a sudden women were giving birth to children, and of course that carried on. I mean, I was born right at the end of that sort of, because that sort of 25-year period, and I think I do say it that I have Faye, one of the characters, actually describing it to one of the others as we're seeing a baby boom, because the South London Hospital would have been the sort of hospital that would have seen that. Yeah. I mean, because they were a women's hospital. So they would have been overwhelmed by pregnant women about to give birth. And indeed, they did normally they had 1 maternity ward operating, but at that time they had 2 because there were so many babies being born. And Faye actually describes it as a baby boom, and we all recognise it, that's what it is, or was. That's where the phrase comes from. But I couldn't find anywhere that it was written down until about 1949. But I thought, well, hang on, they'd have used that before then, probably, in just speaking. So I've taken the liberty and put it into Faye's mouth that this is a baby boom.
I would be surprised if anybody could find evidence to question your use of it as well. Just there's no way of proving one way or the other.
No, there isn't. No, you can prove, you can say the first written example is in 1949, but nothing else really. But there are always people who will try and find fault with historical fiction, which is why one doesn't really want to concentrate too much on talking about the nuts and bolts of the research and the things that you find out by researching. I mean, they've all got to be in service of the story anyway. So, the idea is to create that place, that world, without being too didactic about, what tea bags they used. And
you can just say, put the kettle on and made a cup of tea, and that'll do. You don't need to name it. You just say they made tea. Just put the kettle on. People can decide for themselves what they're drinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I absolutely loved right at the beginning, and I won't say too much about it, but I like the fact that to kind of the first quarter or third maybe, there is a bit of a locked room mystery about it. Yeah. And I like that you did something different, and I like the buildings that were used.
Yeah. Yes, I mean there is a locked room mystery type thing. I mean, the first body, if you like, is discovered behind a locked door. So there is that conundrum as to how the corpse got there and what could have happened to her, and so on. And I wanted to do that because I thought that was also very classic for that period. You know, the locker room mystery. Now, it's not quite a locker room mystery, as you appreciate, and I won't say too much about it because it'll give it away.
It's a very tricky thing, but I think that would intrigue me enough if I hadn't read it to go, okay, I need to know what that means. What are they talking about? Why is this kind of a locker room mystery? And then how does it become unlocked?
Yes.
I really like that.
Yeah. Well, and it's partly because the settings are real, that it's possible to be able to do that, which is good, and you know, I think that you know, it will appeal to the sort of person who likes that sort of thing, and it's very much in period. You know, those are the sort of books that were being written in 1946. It's, you know, you're not, I suppose you are sort of golden age of crime, but you're coming towards the end of one episode and the start of the next. So it all fits.
I really like the fact as well, actually, that with the golden age and all of the kind of glamour and all of that stuff, you do hint at that in this, but there is still, it's real. It's very realistic. You don't take the glamour and romance of the kind of the period that we've got in our head away from us, but you do show us that there's something going on beneath that. You know, that's not all there was.
No, and I mean, I'm glad that you think that, because I mean, that was something that I was very anxious to get right.
Well, you
I mean,
did.
There's the scene in the nightclub, for example, which is in flashback, which is quite sort of glamorous and is the sort of thing you see in movies and TV series about this period. And the sort of Ellie, who herself is quite beautiful. But that's a sort of running joke, really. I mean, you know, that Faye watches men's reactions when they're first introduced to Ellie, which is quite funny. So you've got that sort of element of glamour, but that's something that happens, you know, either off stage or on the big movie screen when, you know, people are talking about when they're going to pictures to see whoever, David Niven or whatever. It's a matter of life and death that they're going to see, which is the Powell and Pressburger film at the Odeon, which was actually the royal premiere film of 1946. So there.
I like that all ties together.
It does all tie together. But so there is this sort of hint of that really rather sophisticated and glamorous world. But hey, this is South London. This is South London in 1946, and it's not glamorous. It's not in any way like those old movies. Although actually they did make quite a lot of movies set in sort of working class London at that time. If anybody who's watches the TV station Talking Pictures will recognise lots of movies set in more, well, not lots, but more than there are now, I would say, with working class settings, and a wonderful resource for writers. If anybody wants to know what the interior of a working class house in 1950s London looked like, you'll find it on Talking Pictures somewhere.
Wow.
And 1960s, 1940s. It's great.
Now, in the vein of here's one we prepared earlier, what have you been reading recently?
Well, I mentioned this to Sam before we started because I have been reading this, which is a play, actually. It's called Nye. It's by Tim Price, and I went to see it at the National Theatre. And it's about the life and work of Nye Bevan, who is widely seen as the founder of the National Health Service. And there was a lot of that in there, but it's also about his life in Wales. And he grew up in poverty. His father was a miner, and it takes you through his childhood up until his death. And indeed, that's where the story starts, when he's on his deathbed and he's remembering the past. But I also took away this, which was actually, this was given to me by a friend who went to see it, which is a facsimile of a leaflet that was produced at the time, which was handed out to the general populace, and it's called The New National Health Service. Your new National Health Service begins on the 5th of July. What is it and how do you get it? And it promptly proceeds to tell you, what you are now entitled to without payment. And it actually says at one point, where are we? There are no. I'll read it out. It will provide you with all medical, dental, and nursing care. Everyone, rich or poor, man, woman, or child, can use it or any part of it. There are no charges except for a few special items. There are no insurance qualifications. But it is not a charity. You are all paying for it, mainly as taxpayers, and it will relieve your money worries in time of illness. What better?
I wonder what the special items meant. Have you got any idea what they were?
Well, it's prescription charges, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Because
makes sense.
Originally, the NHS was supposed to be entirely free, but England and Wales have never had an entirely free service. Scotland have, because Scotland refused to implement prescription charges, but England and Wales allowed prescription charges to be introduced. So not for the poorest, but for everybody else, you have to pay to get your prescription filled. And I assume, I don't know, but I assume that that's what it is, because that would be something that would impact on the users of the new service immediately.
Yeah.
Rather than some esoteric heart surgery or something. I'm assuming that refers to.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assumption, because anything, I couldn't think what it could be. You go to the hospital, they're not going to charge you for bandages. So what is it going? It never occurred to me that actually it's the prescriptions. It's after the appointments rather than during.
Yeah.
See, this is why you're the bright one that can write these things, and I sit here pondering and confusing myself.
This is why, if you look at sort of over that shoulder, you will see the Midnight Man propped up there on a pile of books, which are all about post-war creation of the welfare state, etc., etc. So it's not being particularly bright. It's just reading an awful lot. That's all.
Reading vast amounts of research. Did anything really surprise you when you were doing your research?
The one thing that really surprised me was that there was no history of the hospital. There's no biography of the hospital. There's no biography of either of its founders, which I find absolutely astonishing. I mean, first of all, it was a hell of an achievement to set this place up. Incredibly difficult, but they did it. It was open for 80 years, best part of, and it would have helped thousands and thousands of women and children. And it will all be forgotten, because there is nothing. There's nothing to remind you of it. Maud Chadbourne has a road named after her, Maud Chadbourne Place, and there is a clinical academic lectureship at St George's, Tooting, in conjunction with the University College London, called the Maud Chadbourne Clinical Academic Lectureship, and that's still going. And Eleanor Davis Colley, who was the first woman to be admitted to the Royal College of Surgeons, had a lecture theatre named after her there. Though since they've reorganised their headquarters, I think that's gone as well. But in fact, as we currently speak, this is the only book about the SLH, which I think is. I mean, I'm very glad that at least as the background for a crime thriller, it'll be remembered. But I still think it's astonishing that it's not remembered more widely.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it.
No. And people haven't, and there aren't that many of them. I mean, London had what was called the New Hospital, which is now the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, and that's still going. There was the Marie Curie in the East End, which I don't believe is going any longer, and there was the SLH, the South London Hospital, and the South London was the largest of in the UK, the largest women-only hospital in the UK. And obviously had a global reach with all the people it trained, and yet it was closed and will be forgotten unless people make an effort. And I'm trying hard. I'm appearing as part of the Royal College of Nursing summer exhibition programme, doing a talk on the SLH, and also with the History of Nursing Society. I'm doing a session for them and writing for their magazine and the Nursing Times and things like that. So I'm doing my best.
Do you think there's enough information there if somebody wanted to write non-fiction? Would you yourself be interested in that?
Exactly when I'd fit that in, I don't know. There is a lot of information. Because Lambeth Archives still have things like all the minutes of meetings. I've read quite a lot of them, and also the plans. When I first went to the Lambeth Archive, I must tell you, is now in Lambeth Town Hall in Brixton in a brand new spanking facility, which I'm sure it needs and deserves. But at the time, they were in a tiny little library called the Minette Library, in the middle of a big residential development. In fact, the first time I went, I thought, I'm in the wrong place here. What's the library doing here? Little 1930s building, and it was the Minette Library housing the Lambeth Archives, and I went there and spent a lot of time there. And the archivists were incredibly helpful. And I was looking for photographs because I needed to visualize what the hospital outside and inside looked like. And I explained this to them, and they said, no, you don't want photographs. We can give you some photographs, and we'll get those for you. But what you actually want is plans. And I said, well, you mean you've got plans? And they said, yes, we've got architect's drawings. When the 1930s building was constructed, they knocked down one of the old buildings that they built originally and constructed the big 1930s block, well, a huge one, and the plans are still in the archive. So when I have Faye striding along the corridor and ending up in the gardens, I know which corridor she was striding along, and there's quite a lot of information about the hospital. I'm sure someone dedicated with time could.
So this is your way of saying it's definitely not me, Sam.
You could definitely write a book about it. I might make a pamphlet, but that's about it. I think it would be a wonderful book, and maybe it's something for the future. I don't know, but there is a lot of material, but not as much perhaps about the founders as one would like. Astonishingly, when I was corresponding with the Royal College of Nursing, a lady from their museums and archive contacted me, and we arranged a date for me to do the talk and so on. And then she said at the end, incidentally, I am the great granddaughter of Maud Chadbourne, one of the founders of the hospital. And I met with Antonia, and I also spoke with her father, who could remember a lady he called Aunt Mary, who was actually Maud. Because Maud and Eleanor lived together. They were a pair in work and life. They were a couple, and they adopted 3 children. And Antonia is the daughter of the son of one of those children. Wow. So it was actually lovely. Earlier this week, I went with Antonia to visit Juliet at Wimbledon, the surgeon, the retired surgeon, who has a box full of goodies about the early hospital, and took Antonia along to meet her, and they had a wonderful time going through these boxes full of documents and photographs of the old hospital, some of which Antonia knew about, some of which she didn't know about at all. I mean, she didn't know about a lot of the protests against the hospital closure, for example, and the fact that it was international, and and it became a women's cause célèbre with women from Greenham Common coming down and joining the sit-in, and so on and so forth. So she's actually learned an awful lot, and her family have learned an awful lot. And it was really nice for Juliet to meet the great granddaughter of one of the founders. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, I love that. You've obviously talked to a lot of really interesting people and found out lots of interesting things, and I think that's what comes through in the writing.
Well, I hope so. I hope it is interesting, as well as engaging and sort of crime writery things.
There'll be lots of things that I go off and look at, and indeed have done.
Yeah.
I've left some things until after the interview because I didn't want to know too much. I want to hear you talk about it.
Yeah.
Because you always do that so well.
Oh, Sam.
Well, keep having you back, Julie.
Thank you. I hope that that people are interested in it, really. I mean, obviously, I hope they're interested in the book. I'm a writer, I want to sell books, but I hope too that people are interested in the subject matter, and in the old hospital.
There's a lovely comment from Malcolm. Fabulous interview, much success, Julie. Congratulations, Holbeck, a true signing.
Oh, I say,
how lovely!
Isn't that nice?
And
Thank
then
you,
there's lovely Donna saying she loved this book. Capital letters for loved.
Oh, thank you, Donna.
Best of luck with it, Julie. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us, and thank you to yourself and Holbeck for the advanced copy that just absolutely loved reading. I actually said to you in a message, I think, that when I picked it up, it was exactly the kind of thing I was in the mood for, and I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
Because I don't usually read the blurb, so I just started, and I read the prologue. Anyone who's on the fence, go and read the prologue on Amazon, and you will buy it based on this prologue. You will hit the last 2 lines of the prologue, and you'll be like, right, I'm in. I didn't move. That was it. I was in. Those 2 lines, those 2 lines. I was like, oh,
what was it? What was it?
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's come along and watched, and please go and buy the book. It's bloody brilliant.
Well, thank you for having me, and as ever, it's always been a pleasure talking to you.
And you. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, bye.